Don, we've got the local authority who enforce the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981, and we've got Natural England, and Natural England, aren't they an independent body that give out licenses only under very special circumstances? So what do you think the problem is? Do you think there's a problem?
It depends how you look at the situation. The local authority are the ultimate people. It's Mary Davison and Mr. Cookson who really have the biggest say of all whether a wildlife can be looked after or eradicated or whatever they decide. Natural England only give, you'll find, advice. You can't take them to court or take them to task, but they issue the licenses, and they're supposed to check on to see whether, as far as badgers are concerned, whether there is a safe alternative set that the badgers are using before they can exclude them, and to make sure their food supply is adequate. Sustainable natural food supplies is adequate. Otherwise, people are supposed to look after that clan or social group of badgers in the meantime. Now, the police are supposed to be the people who enforce the law, but they don't want to know.
Is that because
you've got everybody saying, well, you must. The police say, oh no, we'll refer it to the borough council. The council say, Mr. Wise, if there's a problem, the police are there to enforce the law. Natural England say, we just give advice.
Right. So, Natural England, I think you mentioned the other day they're a merge between DEFRA and the original Natural.
Yes. The other day when we spoke, English Nature had offices at Peterborough that we all wrote to, and they issued a licence for development. Then DEFRA, which came from the old agricultural ministry people, DEFRA gave licences for damage to property, crops and that sort of thing. Now the two have been combined. Unfortunately, the licensing office that does the wildlife licences is still a DEFRA derivative, because their offices are Bristol, Guildford and so forth, whereas the other side of Natural England, the Peterborough and Lewis people, are much more sympathetic when you talk to them, and do go along with the sensible lines that they're supposed to go along. In other words, if I clear a site, because common lizards are supposed to be transferred, or were, then where they came from was a donor site, and where they went to was a receptor site. And from Hastings power station area, I use that word, they took 800 up to Fairlight on 2 sites, and they've all perished.
Why is that?
Well, because they're totally alien. Because if I put my dog in a shed with no food and shut the door, after a month it would be dead, wouldn't it?
And nobody would know if they were not monitoring.
Right. That's it. Well, the same thing. You see, they have done annual surveys. I've got reports upstairs. We visited the old helipad area ourselves, and we saw the kestrels busy having marvellous feasts of common lizards up there. It's all a bit depressing. When we rang up Natural England at the time, they said, Lewis' office, they said, yes, Mr. Wise, we realise there's less than 9% of survival of any population of common lizards that are transferred to a donor site, to a receptor site, and they have since then, from our complaints and other complaints, they have altered it that the common lizards cannot be moved off the donor site, have to be kept carefully placed in a safe area with food on the original donor site.
That's an improvement.
Well, it's an improvement on paper, but the point is, at Hawthorne Road, just for example, the slow worms are being, you see, the word dumped and placement, I use the word dumped. Mr. Davison says, no, Donald, they're being placed. Well, we've seen people go up there with buckets. Oh, no, the person who's shifting them with a bucket and tip them out. Is that being placed or is that being dumped?
I think
that's the point.
Yes.
And the police don't want to know. They're going to build. They're going to build there anyway, Donald.
I'm going to ask you.
That's not abiding the law, and the police have got. Chief Inspector Martin Sims has got 60. He told Chairman and myself they have 60 trained wildlife crime prevention officers in Sussex.
Right, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, and there's 3 in Hastings, but when we called them to 2 sites, they didn't want to know.
Terrible.